Today we've got a crazy story about getting a husband arrested. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, how I almost got married to my cheating partner. They say second chances aren't always so bad. And this would be true in some cases, some very rare cases, but not for me, and not in mine, because in all actuality, the second chance that I opted for has to be quite literally the worst decision I had ever made in the entirety of my life. One might be wondering what could possibly have been the outcome of my decision to provide a second chance to a particular person or individual, and exactly how they wasted the opportunity. Well, this is just a simple relationship issue, one where I was greatly undervalued, underappreciated, and unloved. And even after countless efforts to try and revive the relationship, as I was overly invested at that point in time, my partner made everything I was doing seem vain. And even after ending things, he still came back for a second chance, and I openly accepted my partner back into my life, not knowing that I was in for one heck of a journey. And after quite a while of taking all the degrading treatments, I finally stood up for myself and got back my dignity and basically my revenge. The genesis of my story could be traced way back to when I was still a single lady in her early 20s, just casually meeting people at this point, because I'd never been in a relationship. And at that point in my life, it was already beginning to seem like a wild adventure to go on. And even after much persuasion from family and mostly friends, I still was not interested, not even in the slightest, in getting into a relationship at the time. However, at the time, this was almost the time when I'd met my now ex-partner, male 24, who at the time was still a complete stranger to me. But then, our story was yet to be known at the time, and I was unsure as to what the future held in store for the both of us. But yet again, I was interested in him at first glance. The year was 2020, we had just graduated from high school, and by we, I quite literally mean every other single one of my friends whom I knew personally. And we were within the same age group and all. Anyways, at this time, most of my peers were already looking or still looking to further their educational future by applying for various colleges that they possibly could. Others were not really keen on going to college, and they just sat the next year out, all while trying to figure out the next step to take in their lives. And for some others, they were totally uninterested in becoming corporate slaves, or slaves to the corporations. And this was majorly due to their outward view and different perspective on life as a whole. And I was one of these groups of individuals at some point in my life before I got to realize that this viewpoint is not for everyone. As I later got to realize that not everyone is dated for that kind of life. One where they have to be independent and build their lives in possible weather from the extreme bottom upwards. And this realization came when I met my ex-partner. For this story's purpose, let's call him Daniel. Daniel and I crossed paths one very day when I was working part-time at a restaurant. He came in one day as a regular customer, just looking to get a decent meal for the day, and apparently he just couldn't take his eyes off of me, and neither could I, because he was just absolutely stunning. He was quite literally everything any woman would ever want. And not like I would know, but there was just something about him that just made everything seem right. His composure, his accent, his mannerisms and all. I worked the counter that day, and he was all I could focus on. And I knew I was all he could focus on also, as he was always throwing glances my way. I had little to no experience on how to play this entire situation, but thankfully with the help of my friend, things didn't get so awkward on our first encounter with each other, as when she went on over to his table to give him the bill, he put in his phone number and asked for her to pass it on to me right before leaving. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I got his number, and without a moment's thought, I called him right after I'd gotten off my shift for the day. And we had one of the purest and most interesting conversations ever. He told me a lot about himself, but just enough to get me interested, and I must say it worked, as I was overly interested in what he had said to me. I couldn't even believe it. I was quite receptive too, as the conversation went on for hours, and then he proposed we meet up later on for a date, if that was okay with me. Of course it was. I mean, this was what I actually wanted from the very beginning. While we were on our date, I found out that Daniel was in his penultimate year in college, and he was well versed with his study. There were various things about him that just seemed right, and his use of grammar was one of them. He had this fluent and precise use of words that just gave him a different look. And to be honest with you, I totally felt intimidated by his aura and the energy he was giving off. At that moment, when we were having a conversation in real life about things we had both experienced and gone through, I found out that he was definitely not on the same level that I was, and I attributed this to the fact that I'd never furthered my academic path to college. It seemed to have had an effect on me, one I didn't know of at the time, and I'm guessing with almost certainty that he knew about this, as he even asked me if I was just a high school graduate. And I chose not to answer him, but asking another question, to which he replied that he could tell from the way I was speaking and the perspective I come from. He said I'd not gotten enough exposure and I was just making up for that with my smarts. I didn't know if it was a compliment or a shade. I just let it slide. Anyways, right after our first dinner, I completely had a total change of mind and viewpoint. I knew right then and there that I wanted things to be better for me. I knew I had the potential to be someone great, and that the process of getting a degree doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to be a corporate slave, as I'd initially thought. And then I took it upon myself to go through college, as I knew I could do what others failed to do. I could be successful, and it was all because of the way Daniel made me feel. Not in a bad way, but then in a way, I think he kind of unconsciously motivated me to be the best version of myself that I could ever be. So I stopped working at the restaurant when I'd gathered just enough money to take care of myself for a while, and my parents handled the entirety of the bills. I submitted my application to the exact same college that Daniel was attending, all of this just to surprise him one day. I knew his department, and I was just looking forward to my admission as I was so eager to surprise him. Also, to bring things more into perspective, as at the time, before Daniel left for college, we both were already in a relationship, as he'd confessed his feelings for me right before leaving for school, and he told me that he was going to be back for me. But unknowingly for him, I'd made up my mind to go back to college, and I knew right then and there that this would be the perfect surprise I could give him, as I knew that his birthday was coming up too. So I got admitted, and I received my letter within a month of the application, and as if not to waste any more time, I'd already packed up my bags and gotten the things that I would need before going. And within the week I got my letter, I was already on my way to college. My major was engineering and his was history, and although contrasting, our departments were quite close to each other. But what made it all the more fun was the fact that our forms were literally rooms apart. I made sure not to run into him in the first few days I'd gotten there, and the following week, when I had almost everything planned, I texted him and asked if he was in his dorm, and he affirmed, and so I went to his door, and I saw a sock. I was totally confused. I didn't know what this meant, I just kept on knocking and knocking, until I found out that the door was slightly opened, and so I let myself in. And what I saw was truly disappointing and heartbreaking. I could never have imagined that he would do this to me. Well, I could have imagined, but I chose not to believe. I saw him with another lady in a position I'm too ashamed to even describe. The moment he saw me, his eyes sunk in. He didn't know what to say, or even how to defend himself. He just stayed there in that position as he stared directly into my eyes, while being naked with another lady. I walked out of the room almost in tears. I was totally disappointed in him and what he had done, and he used the entirety of a whole week to ask for my forgiveness. He tried so hard to make me believe that this wasn't intentional. He even came up with various excuses, some of which I actually believed at the time, and almost reconsidered actually forgiving him. But then after recounting the whole situation, I was made to understand by him that, seeing as I was too far away from him at the time, there was nothing he could have done about his urges. And he also tried to make me understand that he couldn't help himself and that this was a one-time thing. And then I started to understand, which was one of the dumbest decisions I'd ever made in my entire life. One thing led to another, and I accepted him back, and slowly but steadily, we were gradually coming back to what we used to be. Now, this is where things get interesting, as right after graduating, almost a year after, he had told me his plans of getting married to me. And I was totally happy about this. And then he said that immediately when I'm done with getting my degree, he wanted to make it official. And I could have gotten no better news. This gave me the drive to work even harder and graduate with the best possible grade. And I did. And just like he planned, he proposed, and I accepted his proposal, which, thinking back now, was a huge mistake on my path. And so we started to prepare for our life together. And when it was almost a whole month to our wedding day, I had the opportunity to see what kind of a man he truly was, as I caught him again, without his notice or knowledge, laying with another woman again. Not just any woman now, this was one of my bridesmaids. I just couldn't believe my eyes. I thought he was telling the truth and that incident was just the first and last. I thought wrong. I spent the next weeks thinking of how to go about the whole situation, and the only thing I could come up with was to leave him standing at the altar. And although this might not have hurt him as much as he hurt me, but then I know I dodged a bullet, and that leaving him without any explanation whatsoever would be my form of solace. And in all honesty, it was. The confusion he was in for the next few months was payback enough for me. I never spoke to him from that day on. Leaving him standing at the altar is pretty good, but I just hope OP made sure and went out of their way that any kind of payment for these services for the wedding was put on his tab. Don't just leave him standing alone at the altar, hit him where it hurts, in the wallet. Also, hi, I'm Steven, and if you guys enjoy crazy stories of revenge, it would be awesome if you left a like or left a review if you're listening to my podcast. That said, our next story is, girlfriend dumps me for ex, so I crash her car. There's something to be said for women who were thoroughly mistreated by their ex. I don't know how to explain it. There has to be a name for it because I think it's some kind of mental health disorder. Correct me if I'm wrong, but most of the time, when a woman dates a toxic guy who mistreats her and puts her through all sorts of emotional abuse, those are the types of exes that they can never let go of. Those are the kinds of guys they pine for when they're gone and the ones they talk about in their sad TikTok reposts. These guys have a hold on them way more than the good, stable guys ever did. I, 29-year-old male, didn't used to think this was the case. In fact, I used to be very naive when it comes to women. I don't know if naive is the best word, but I used to think women reacted more to the guy who treated them well, or at least would stay in a relationship where it was obvious they were loved. Well, if that was the case, then my ex-girlfriend Monique wouldn't have left me for the same guy who emotionally manipulated her and cheated on her countless times. What really hurt was the fact that I adored Monique. I hadn't been in a lot of relationships before her, and I really loved her. I never hesitated to show her just how much. I met Monique on one of those rainy days. It was in the evening and I'd just gotten off work. My roommate had gone out with some of his guys, and since it was a Friday, I decided to go out to the bar and get a drink. The rain hasn't started to fall yet. In fact, the sky still looked nice, with the beautiful sunset in the distance, but I just knew it was going to rain. I had this weird talent for reading the sky, so I took my umbrella as I went out. I got to the bar and ordered my drink. I was going to take a six-pack to go and maybe watch a movie as I drink, but then I spotted her in the distance. She was seated in one of the booths at the far end of the bar. She was seated alone, and the way she was looking intermittently at her wristwatch, I realized that she was waiting for someone. I wanted to go over to talk to her, but I was very nervous, so I decided against it. But I didn't want to leave either. It would upset me for the entire day if I didn't go over to talk to her. So instead, I got my beer and took a seat in one of the booths. My plan was to get slightly buzzed, just enough for me to get enough courage to go over and talk to her. 2 bottles later, I looked up just in time to see her stand up from her seat and walk over to the door. I was so disappointed because I thought I'd missed my chance. But just then, the rain I had earlier anticipated started to fall. I thought this would dissuade her from leaving, but it didn't. She looked at her phone once more before stepping into the rain. I immediately picked up my umbrella and followed her. I hurried over to meet her and covered her with the umbrella before the rain completely soaked her outfit. She was very surprised to see me standing beside her. I said hi and told her I saw her walking out of the bar without an umbrella, and I just thought I would come and help out. She asked if I was going to do that for everyone without umbrellas in the bar, and I said, only the pretty ones. But sadly, there's no one in that bar that's as pretty as you. She smiled and let down her guard. We started to talk as we walked to the bus stop, and I told her I'd been trying to work up the courage to talk to her. She seemed surprised by the fact. By the time we got to the bus stop, I asked her for her number. She didn't want to give it to me at first. It almost looked as though she was fighting a mental battle, but eventually I convinced her. I waited with her until the bus showed up and she left. That same evening, as soon as I got home, I texted her and we started talking. Our back and forth was very exciting that on the first day, we texted late into the midnight. She told me she was a college student in her final year and she was about to graduate. We texted every day without fail, and soon enough, she became a very important part of my life. I liked her from the beginning, but as I got to know her deeply, I started to develop feelings for her. One time during our discussion, I asked her about the day we met. Like I said, she was checking her watch as though she was waiting for someone. She said it was true and that she was waiting for her ex-boyfriend. He was supposed to meet her at the bar so they could talk things out, but he didn't show up. I asked about him and why they broke up, and she told me. At the end of that discussion, it was clear that he was a real jerk to her, and she deserved way better than him. I mean, he cheated on her with his friend's girlfriend and her best friend. Aside from that, he gaslighted her occasionally and made her feel less of herself. Even though she didn't let it show, she was a wreck, and he did that to her. This should have been a sign for me to steer clear of pursuing anything romantic with her, but as I said, I was naive and I probably had a problem with savior's complex. Anyway, I was there for her for whatever she needed. I was her rock, her shoulder to lean on. I always made sure she was happy. One day, after taking a few shots of vodka, I asked her if she'd like to go on a date with me. She agreed and we went out. We went out a few more times before I finally had the courage to ask her to be my girlfriend. She said yes and we started dating. Thinking about it now, I shouldn't have asked her out. She hadn't totally gotten over her ex, and I knew it. But I thought being with me could help her forget him. Besides, we were good friends. We would still probably be good friends if we didn't date. I guess I ruined everything when I decided to ask her to be my girlfriend. Anyways, we started dating, and for a few months, everything was bliss. We were together all the time and we did everything together. I made sure to treat her better than all the people she had dated so that she knew she was worthy of love. But I guess that wasn't enough. One day, I was scrolling through TikTok, lounging on my couch after work. I came across a video on my For You page and I watched it. It was the video of some girl who'd had a bad experience with an ex and how all her relationships after that couldn't help her heal. I looked at who reposted it and realized that it was Monique. This bothered me a lot because it was quite recently. I decided to look through her reposts. I hadn't done this before because I wasn't one to stalk girlfriends, but here I was thinking my girlfriend was happy to be with me, but her repost said something else. I asked her about it, and she told me her social media didn't reflect what she was feeling in real life, and it was just her having fun. I knew in my heart that she wasn't telling the truth, but I decided not to press. A few weeks later, Monique graduated and her mom gifted her with a new Chevrolet Camaro. It had been her dream car for a long time and she was so happy when she got it. During the after party of her graduation, her ex, who she hadn't heard from in months, showed up. Let's call him Tom, 29-year-old male. Tom asked to speak to her and I expected that she would tell him off. Instead, she agreed to speak to him. I asked her why, and she said she just wanted to hear what he had to say before she told him never to contact her again. I couldn't forbid her from talking to him, so I let her go. She came back a few minutes later, and I asked her what they talked about. She glossed over the details and said it was fine. I had a feeling it wasn't fine, but I decided to let it go. I trusted her, and I didn't think there should be a reason for me not to. But in time, I realized that you could give a person the world and love them with all your heart. It doesn't mean they would do the same for you. Over the next few weeks, Monique started to text me less and less. She used to come over to my place at least 4 times a week before, but that changed also. I had to call her to come around, and sometimes she would give an excuse that she was busy or something. She never gave excuses before, and that was how I knew that something was wrong. One day I checked out her location on my map and realized that she wasn't at home. I called her and asked her where she was, and she lied to me. She said she was home in bed. Over the next few days, I saw that she spent a lot of time at that location, so I decided to take a drive over there to see who stayed there. Imagine my shock when I got to the house and saw that it was her ex, Tom, who lived there. I was so pissed off that I went over to start a fight with him. I even warned him to leave my girlfriend alone, but before I got back home, I received a call from Monique telling me that she was done with the relationship. I literally got dumped over the phone. I tried calling her again and again, but her line didn't go through. She blocked my number and all my social media. It was the most painful experience of my life. I didn't leave my house for weeks. My appetite was all messed up and I even fell sick. All I could think of was how terrible of a person she was to break up with me for her ex who treated her terribly. She wouldn't even let me talk to her so I could get closure. One day, I decided to leave the house and go over to Tom's. I was sure I would meet Monique there, and I was right. She parked in his driveway. I stayed outside for a few minutes, thinking of what to do. Eventually, I settled for trashing her car. I stepped out of my car and checked my trunk for tools. I found a screwdriver and I walked into the driveway. I used the screwdriver to puncture all her tires. Then I picked up a rock from the street. I threw it at the rear windscreen and watched it shatter into pieces. It tripped the car alarm and I hurried back to my car and drove off before they came out to see what happened. I know my revenge didn't match up to the heartache she caused me, but that was all I could do without getting caught. At least she'll have to spend a lot of money replacing the tires and rear window. The rock even made a dent in the body and scratched the paint. She'll have to fix that too. Is it wrong to describe this as like a classic revenge on a total backstabbing ex like this? I mean, it's one thing to go back to your ex, sure. I mean, it's obviously crappy to do, but it happens. But it's another to not even give closure, not even be able to face OP after that, just ghost them. I'm not saying what OP did was right, but considering the levels of the way they got dumped and just shoved to the side and ghosted, it's not surprising that OP kinda snapped. Our next story is, got my abusive husband of 10 years arrested for his actions. It's no more than payback than it is more of letting him get what he deserved. I think the scariest thing I've ever woken up to, or in this case the scariest moment of my entire life, was the moment where I woke up to my husband beating the living daylight out of our child for reasons unknown to me, and I stood up for my children. But thankfully his entire actions were being recorded by the hidden cameras I'd placed all around the house to capture moments like this. And right after that day, I made sure that he would never in his entire life be able to lay a single finger on either myself or any other member of my family. This is the story of how I was able to pay back my abusive husband for the hard time he had put me and our family through. And I was remorseful about the outcome of my actions, but I did what I had to do. I, female 36, have been married to my husband, male 40, for almost 10 years now and counting. Not happily. And I know what you might be thinking. What could possibly be the reason for me to have thought this way of our marriage? What could my husband possibly have done for me to want our marriage to come to an end? This was also the thoughts of family and friends alike, as he always forced me to keep up with this farce of a marriage. It wasn't like he was telling me to do so, more like he was threatening me to comply. And I could do nothing but listen and comply, like a loyal dog, listening to every command of its master. He wasn't always like this, my husband. For this story's context and for privacy purposes, I won't use his actual name, let's call him Bernard. He wasn't always this way. I can remember quite vividly the very first day I met him. It was one summer break back when we were still kids, or teenagers rather. We were still in high school at the time and things were a lot different back then. I was supposed to go out with my girlfriends back then and we had all organized how the entire day was going to be spent. But then there was this particular friend of ours that was never sticking to the plan and always found a way to disrupt the entire schedule that took a whole entire week to plan out. And the entire day was almost canceled due to various other reasons, this friend of ours being the number one. And although the entire day didn't play out as expected, what is important is that that day still went according to how we planned. The only difference being the slight shift in the time from morning to evening, and we still had quite a blast. We even took that opportunity to engage ourselves in the activities at the club, one that would accept our fake IDs anyways, as we were obviously underage at the time, and not many clubs were as lax as others were when it came to security of minors and restrictions too. Right after the club closed, this was around 1 a.m. in the middle of the night, my other friends had booked a cab and they were about to head out, only for me to realize that there were no other cabs around at the time, and the one they were all in wasn't big enough to contain all of us. While we were trying to settle this issue we had, a gentleman patted me on my shoulder and offered to share his ride with me, as he had noticed that I couldn't get one. When I turned to look at him, he was simply eye-catching. Every single feature he had physically was distinctive. Before he could say anything more, I'd already accepted his offer, and I immediately went to stand by his side as my friends bid me farewell. We stood there for a while, awkwardly in fact, as neither of us was ready to initiate a conversation. And then all of a sudden he introduced himself and I did the same. Our conversation continued from there, and I found myself telling him things that he needed, or rather wanted to know. Then it later occurred to me that I had zero level of security consciousness. I was literally standing outside of a club in the late hours of the night with a complete and total stranger, and I was telling him everything he wanted to know about me. When this realization hit, I just immediately silenced myself, but then I couldn't keep this up for long, as he actually made me feel quite comfortable and safe. Anyways, his cab came and we exchanged numbers as he wanted to continue the conversation at a later time, and I was open to this too. He dropped off at his destination and ordered the driver to do the same for me, as he bid me farewell, after highlighting at his own destination. This was quite the encounter, as I just didn't know what to tell my friends when they asked me what happened between the both of us the night of our outing. I guess they were expecting me to have gotten laid with him or something. I had to clear the air, and I told them what really happened, and although some of them were quite disappointed with the ending of my story, my best friend was honestly happy and just glad I was safe that night. And that was when she informed me of the security risks I ignored the night before. I knew all of these, I just totally overlooked them. At the same time, while they were trying to call me out on all of these things, I was already receiving a direct message from the stranger I had met last night. He was asking me when I would be free, as he would very much love to meet me again, and just like that, that was how we met each other. And in under a few weeks, leading to months, we were finally able to get things in order. And by getting things in order, I quite literally mean get the knowledge of what we know of each other in order, and find the way forward for the both of us, as at this time, we both had found a tag for ourselves and we were quite eager to take our relationship to the next stage, or rather the next level. It should be noted that we had both gotten our I love yous out of the way, and we had fully established that too. Our vibes matched, our personalities were complementing each other perfectly, and we were in sync with each other on basically everything. At the time, there seemed to be absolutely nothing wrong with getting to look to the future with him, and I think he also felt the same way about me too. Anyways, fast forward a few years later, we both had just gotten into different colleges, as we were both majoring in different fields. And then I found out that things were not as I'd expected them to be in our relationship. Well, not every single relationship is supposed to be all roses and peaches. There would always be tough and hard times in a relationship. There would always be those times when people in a relationship would have a particular moment where things are not going their way. What is important is that they get through these tough times together, and this is what Bernard and I did. We got through tough times together as a couple. Although the distance between the both of us posed quite a bit of a problem at the time, this was of no consequence, as we both truly had genuine feelings for each other, and we decided deep down that we wanted to make this thing between us work. And it honestly did. Even though we only got to see each other on some special holidays like Christmas and the likes, where we both had the opportunity to come back home and spend the holidays with family, and most importantly, with each other. And just like that, time had passed by really fast, and I was already looking at the final year of being in college, and so was he. I don't know how prepared he was with this, but then again, right after I just graduated from college, he came on over for my ceremony, and he proposed to me right then and there, asking me to make him the happiest man on the planet. I mean, there was no reason to say no. He was the one I truly wanted to spend the rest of my life with, and I would give anything to be with him for the rest of my life. And so I accepted his proposal, and we had decided to spend the rest of our life together from that moment on. Little did I know that this was literally the beginning of everything wrong in my life. Fast forward a little to about 2 years after getting married, things were really going well for the both of us, as our little family, as we were, just at the time, in the verge of welcoming the newest member and addition to our family, our firstborn son, and this was ecstatic news. Also, in the area of general well-being, we both were doing pretty well for ourselves, as this was the kind of life I truly wanted, no questions asked. And most importantly, my husband loved me with everything that he has, was, and owned. He was the perfect husband. At the time, that is. We welcomed our son, and almost 3 years down the line again, we were welcoming our second child, my beautiful daughter, who was apparently the apple of her father's eye. He totally loved and adored her. she came into our lives and things, I would never underestimate my love or her father's love for her, not even in the slightest. But then, the next 2 years after her birth, this was when everything just took a nosedive, both in our relationship and in our lives. Well, for starters, there was a mishap in his workplace, and some of the workers in his department had to be let off without incentives. And this really ruined him. And as his partner and wife, I tried my possible best to be there for him and to support him through these tough times. But then I got to see the negative side of him after almost 7 years of being married together. This was a side of him I had never seen before, as at this time he wasn't physical with me just yet. He just felt repulsed by every single thing I said and did. He didn't want to stay at home, and he didn't have time for me or any of his children. He was just slowly but surely drifting apart. And when I tried to approach him and talk to him about this 2 years down the line, this was where he got frustrated and took out his anger and frustration on me. He would physically assault me and then leave the house, traumatizing our children in the process. But I was okay with this at the time, as it wasn't affecting my children, or so I thought. Not until one very day, I noticed that there were bruises and markings on the body of my children. When I asked, apparently he had beaten them up when he came back home and they weren't doing anything, and then he left the house again after inflicting beatings upon them. This was where I decided that enough was enough. I needed to report him, but before I did that, I needed evidence. Cold, hard evidence. And so I got a portable camera and hid some around the house while I was away for the day. And when I came back that night, I was too tired. I went to sleep immediately, only to be awoken by the cries of my children. As I rushed downstairs, I called 911 and hurried to shield my children from his beatings. And after seeing the way that he handled them like animals, I stood up for them and took his beatings in their place. Luckily for me, I got everything on the camera I'd kept lying around, and just at that time, the officers barged in and placed him in cuffs. I was thankful enough that I got everything in recording, and this was enough to put him away, even though this was very hard for me to do. But it had to be done. I haven't seen him in 5 years now, and I'm glad I gave him what he deserved. I mean, it's a smart thing to set up those cameras to make sure that there is very clear evidence. At the same time, though, I think you and your kid's testimony that this is happening, and also the physical proof, the bruises and other signs that you were getting hurt, I would hope that that alone would be concrete evidence enough, wouldn't it? I don't know, I guess you hear plenty of stories of either cops or the court system just completely failing people who in no way should they have failed. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely crazy revenge story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.